Want me to try?
Sure.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Wonderland Wednesday. Today we're going to be reviewing the 1910 silent version of Alice in Wonderland. We really liked the 1903 version. This one, sadly, not so much. We'll talk about our pros and cons. It is not the worst version I have seen, but it's not one that I would go back to as much as the 1903.
So it begins with Alice on the bank with her sister, and she sees the white rabbit, which we really liked the white rabbit in this version. It was a little kid in a rabbit costume.
Adorable. And her hair is great. She has these sort of sausage curls that must be the precursor to Shirley Temple, but in a 1910 way. And her sister also has the elegant updo of the day, but you can tell that she's the more grown-up one.
So Alice follows the rabbit down the hole, and unlike the 1903 version where she's just walking down like a corridor or a tunnel, she's actually falling in this version. But there's not really anything that she's falling past. It's sort of like she's falling down a tube or a tube slide. But it looked pretty good for the time, considering what year it was.
And we thought that the scene with the doors went a little bit slow.
When she gets to the bottom, the scene with the doors just seems to drag.
And I don't think you could read the tag well at all.
No.
You didn't get the detail of the story as much. Once again, it was a story built for people who already knew the plot line. And they were also playing around with special effects in this one, where you saw the white rabbit go by her and she looks gigantic and he's just a little mini guy. And it was like they combined scenes from the rabbit's house.
When she's in the hall of doors, there's one point where she sticks her arm out the door.
And it's just sort of, come on everybody. And you see these little creatures come up. So they were tinkering around with early special effects. And it can seem a little bit slow, but to the people of the time, it probably looked really cool. And they probably wanted to sit there and watch her move her hand around for a while in front of these tiny little people.
There's also a thing in the middle of the Hall of Doors scene where she cries the river of tears. But it's not like other versions where she gets swept away and then she goes to the caucus race. It's basically she just falls in a pool and then climbs out and dries off, which that scene leads into the sticking her arm out the door. Eventually she shrinks down again and she gets out and she sees a giant puppy, which that was a really brief scene.
But they did a better job of conveying it than the 1903 version, because that one it was just dog. This one they had a little white dog wandering around, once again playing with the special effect of large and small.
And if you thought that this scene was abbreviated, in the 1903 version it was like 2 seconds of the dog, and you couldn't really tell the size difference.
It was an adult dog, so they conveyed it better this time.
Yeah. So after the puppy, she ends up at the Duchess's house.
And this is another scene where my saying miniature comes in, because it looks more like a child's playhouse that she's entering into. She's pretty large in comparison to this house, which isn't always the case.
And this is probably one of my favorite costumes for the Duchess, I would say, because it's giant hats instead of giant heads that we've seen in other versions. And then in the same scene, you have the Cheshire Cat, which is basically a cardboard cutout sitting in the corner. There's no real extended scene with the Cheshire Cat, it's just sort of there.
But not the worst Cheshire Cat I've ever seen.
True, very true.
So she talked to the Cheshire Cat briefly, and then went on to the tea party. And the Mad Hatter was a little boy with these gigantic sideburns. He was pretty cute. Also playing into the miniature little people, little chair. Her chair was much smaller in this one than in the previous version.
And there was another dormouse, but this scene with dormouse I think was even funnier than the last one.
It was just a little plushie.
But the two little kids, when they were trying to stuff it in the teapot, they were sort of pounding on the mouse.
They were letting out their little boy aggression on this mouse, and it was funny and cute, and one of our favorite parts, I think.
It was very cute and funny.
I think it probably made us chuckle every time we watched it. So.
Mm-hmm. So after the tea party, they go to the Queen's castle, and again we have more child cards like we mentioned for the 1903 version. There wasn't a whole lot that really happened in the scene though.
Not a lot. One of the odd things was that they fell backwards instead of forwards when the Queen came along. The Queen in this one was an adult.
Yeah.
And this was the one where they did the really weird walks, wasn't it?
Yeah, everybody was walking around very exaggeratedly for some reason.
Everybody was doing it, not just the guards, so it didn't really look like some royal guard military walk. And the one who got into it the most was the executioner, which was probably one of Jonathan's favorite characters.
He had a funny pose. I don't know, it struck me as hilarious when the little boy dressed as the executioner came up and he like held his axe and he was funny.
Excited over, it was almost like he had discovered the tarts or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
Not completely clear there.
There wasn't a whole lot of explanation. There wasn't many title cards for the last two scenes because that scene in the courtyard led directly into the trial. And it was just sort of chaos. We couldn't really tell what was going on. We knew what was going on because we've read the books, we've seen other versions.
Yeah.
But for this version, it was just kind of chaos.
Once again, if you haven't read the book, this probably isn't the one to start with, unless you just want to see historical footage. This was a scene that it definitely bugged me because it could have been so much better if they had added in more description cards. It just felt like it dragged on forever. You had the witnesses coming, but it wasn't really showing what was happening. Even though this Alice was very physically expressive, trying to tell the story that way, in this scene, it really didn't describe what was happening as well as it should have, and it took too long. If they were going to take that long, they needed to add more detail.
It was a long scene of people just gesturing wildly, it seemed like.
And then at some point, she didn't shrink or grow, and then she had cards swirling around the back of her, almost like a kaleidoscope. But once again, if you didn't know the story, you wouldn't know what was happening, but it didn't tell the story. And then she's back on the bank with her sister, trying to explain that, no, this is real, this really happened. You're trying to infer this from what's happening, but you can just tell. And her sister's like, no, honey, it's not real. And then they sort of laugh and hug, and that's the end, and it was cute.
It was really short. It was basically just kind of a clip show. Just went from scene to scene to scene, like the 1903 version, but they spent a little more time on things.
A little bit more, and some of it they didn't need to spend, so. I definitely recommend the 1903 over this one, but I think that this one is interesting in its own right too.
Yeah, it's fine to watch for historical value, which is what we got out of it. We liked it just because of what it was.
And sadly with this one, no one had taken the time to pair music with it, which would have made it so much better too.
That would have helped a lot.
Anybody want to do that, please feel free. Some nice piano music, make it sound authentic, nothing weird.
Well, I think that's all for today's Wonderland Wednesday. We'll be back next week right here again because we're going to be recording right away for the next one. We'll be reviewing the 1915 version of Alice in Wonderland, and it's probably not going to be one of our favorites, but it was interesting.
In a disturbing way.
It is a much weirder version. So we'll be back next week with that, and we'll see you then.
Bye.